You are tuned to Channel 9, Kennett, Zenith Cablevision. Thank you for watching. It's time for talk. Each evening at this time, Monday through Friday, Rosemary interviews local personalities and others who bring items of interest to this community. Time for Talk is a community betterment service designed to cooperate with our local community betterment program. Tonight's program originates in our Time for Talk studios in the Slicer Street Church. And now, it's time for talk.
We're talking about Dunklin County tonight. We're talking about towns that were platted and never really developed. In fact, you're looking at one of those, but you were looking at one of those things. Right on your screen, a town that was platted but never really developed. T-Bone Hall is our guest again tonight, and he's in his office as recorder of deeds. He has gathered some interesting bits of information. I've learned a lot. On our first program, T-Bone, you showed us a plat of Paulding that had a great number of lots that was never really developed south end of the county. Then you came on up through Arbird, which we learned was originally platted at Bucota.
Bucota, right.
Okay, and then it was moved to Arbird, started by a Mr. A. Period R. Period Bird. And it just all ran together without periods one day and got to be Arbird, but it was at Bucota.
That's right.
Okay.
The original town.
Then we found out that Frisbee was originally named Manly, and that there was a town platted called Moark.
Moark. Yes.
Moark that never really developed either.
Never developed. That's
okay,
right.
and you were just getting to this thing that's on there. And what's the name of this town?
This town is Kennett.
Okay.
Kennett is the original town of Gibson, which is just north of Holcomb, and the railroad right through the heart of Gibson, which was in Kennett, of course. And this was platted in 1890. And the streets were still there, the houses on these lots, and but the official name of the town is Gibson, but our plat shows that it's Kennett still to this day. So some of the old timers in Gibson will come in and check to see if I know what town is what the name is.
You're going to have to be on your toes.
Oh yes, this fellow family up there by the name of Todd. Mr. Todd comes in, and I think he was checking me out. And he came in and he said he wanted to check some dimensions of a lot in a town, and I wanted to know if I had a plat of it. And I said, well, I don't know, give me the name of the town. And he said, the name of the town's Kennett. I said, yes, sir, come right on back. And I said, I think I hurt his feelings. You know what? I said, yes, I know right where it's at.
But he wanted to tell you.
Yes,
that
he wanted to tell me.
Okay, all right.
And now the next town is Calgoa.
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 That'd be interesting where that name came from.
Now, I don't know where the name of the town came from. However, Mr. Hunter, that platted Hollywood, platted Calgoa, the same fellow.
Okay.
So he owned land. Now Calgoa was located north of Glendenville, Missouri, which is north of Campbell.
Okay.
And this was near the Stoddard County line and Dunklin County line, the northwest part of the county. Mm-hmm. But as you can see, he had the streets laid out, Hunter Avenue. Now, here's a connection. The western street was Bird Avenue, B-Y-R-D.
Okay.
Mr. Bird from Arbird.
So you think a lot of these men had great ideas about how Dunklin County was going to develop, and they went in and platted a lot of these things and were going to sell town lots and make $1 million.
That's right. They had the sawmill. They had bought the timber rights, or they bought the land for $1, $2 an acre. Mm-hmm. They set up the sawmills, and most of them were on the railroad, as we've noticed. And I think, well, in one case, now the name of Paulding, the man, Mr. Vale, he was from Indiana.
So they were speculating in lumber. That's the connection with most all of these towns that were like that.
That's right. And what I would like to know the connection is, now like Mr. Hunter, he was from Scott County. Mr. Bird was from Cape Girardeau County.
Okay.
So they knew each other in business previous to this, related. Maybe Mr. Bird married Miss Hunter's sister. Maybe Mr.
So
Hunter.
let's go down and develop southeast Missouri.
That's right.
Okay, now, it's been most interesting talking about these towns, the name change and where they were, and the plats that never really developed, but I would imagine that you have run into some very interesting deeds that have come through your office.
Yes.
Tell me about some of them.
Well, excuse me. I asked an attorney the other day, I asked him, when did the present procedure for adoption come about? And, of course, he didn't understand me completely, and I explained to him, I said, well, I've got some old deeds of adoption.
Deeds of adoption.
Deeds of adoption, and it's in the land record books, just like you would transfer 40 acres from me to you. They transferred the child from these parents to another parent.
They deeded a child?
They deeded the child. That's what it's called, a deed of adoption.
And you have some of those?
Yes, we have, I'm going to say maybe 35, 40. And I have one copy here. This is a deed of adoption, and this was a fellow up around Clarkton. And the name of the child, and the name of the people was Taylor. And it's interesting on this that they adopted a child from a family named Babb, B-A-B-B.
Okay.
And it gives his name as G-R, and then it says Ann -- his wife. Apparently she didn't want her name on the deed, but he signed it.
Oh, okay. All right. So she was a little reluctant to put her name on it.
I don't know what the situation was at that time. But anyway, the Taylors did adopt this child. And usually in all these deeds it says that the party of the first part, which is the people that are going to adopt, will care for her, educate her, clothe her, feed her.
So a lot of stipulations in the deed.
Yes, a lot of stipulations.
I will give this child, and you promise to do thus and so and thus and so.
And usually, like in a deed for land, it's $1 or $10 in consideration, just like a regular deed.
Oh, you mean they paid the fee?
I think technically they probably, really they probably did not, but...
Only a formality.
It's a formality, right, just like a land transfer.
Okay, and that made it binding?
That made it binding,
if had there been no money involved, would it have been binding?
I don't know. That'd be a legal question.
Okay, all right. Okay, now what about, now I know you had a book of miscellaneous deeds. What about some of the things that were in that book?
That cover miscellaneous records will cover a lot of businesses back in the early 1900s that incorporated. Like, they had a Kennett outing club, which had a building out on the San Francisco River. They had boats, so forth and so on. And they might have gambled, I don't know. But they sold
shares. I'm sure they didn't gamble. I'm not perished that far.
But I think they sold the stock for $10 a share, $100 a share.
And you could be a stockholder.
Yes.
And belong to the club.
Belong to the club, and they had canoes and so forth.
Well, that idea has not gone out of...
No, that's still in effect today. Now your golf courses
Your
are like
golf
that.
courses are outing clubs, really, in a way. But now this was the forerunner of all these. These were always out on a river.
Yes, this was, Mr. Shelton was involved there. I know that, an old family, and I think he might have been the president of the corporation. And then the county fairs, they would incorporate.
County fairs?
County fairs. We had, the Peach Festival at Camel.
Incorporated?
Yes.
And
years ago.
sold shares of stock?
Years ago, yes. We had a Dunklin County Fair Association back in the early 1900s.
Was that when the fairgrounds was at Jones Park? I understand there was a track where they had horse races and everything at the county fair.
Mm-hmm. I think the names on these corporations were familiar names. The Pankeys, the Sheltons, the Bardells, Drew Bardell and Mr. Bardell down Hornsville, and some of the old names that I was told when I was a kid,
So the county fairs would incorporate.
They would incorporate.
The outing and the outing
clubs, so many other things that I think, and the banks. They would incorporate the bank who was the stockholder, like they had a bank in Hollywood, Missouri.
A bank at Hollywood.
Right. They had a bank at.
All three of the people could put their money in there. I suppose it was larger than that.
Sure, I'm sure it was.
But then when the bank at Cardwell incorporated, the bank in Hornersville incorporated, same way the bank at Kennett.
I suppose the transportation was such that you didn't just pull up and drive very far. Every place had their own little bank. It was not that
That's right.
unusual. In fact, I think Cardwell had
They
three
may
banks.
have at least 2 or 3, that's right.
Okay. What about the oldest deed? Do you know offhand?
Yeah. The oldest deed that I have found, of course, our records were destroyed prior to 1872.
By fire?
By fire, yes. But the oldest, we have 2 entries in the index, the date of the deed and the date of recording. There could be a difference.
Okay.
Because a person could buy the land and forget to record it, 2 years later record it. So we do put the date of recording and the date of the instrument. Now, I'm looking at trying to find the oldest instrument. And the oldest instrument I found was a Cumberland Presbyterian Church where they bought some property at Clarkton. Now, the deed shows it was initially bought in 1855, but it was probably recorded. The record was destroyed by fire. They, to make sure it was on the books, came in 1872 and said, we want it re-recorded.
But they had a deed for,
They had a deed, yes.
for 1855.
1855, and that's the oldest that I've noticed in the records. There could be some older, but I don't know of any.
Okay. What about now? That was is the Clarkton area the oldest area in the state, to your knowledge, in the county?
Well, that's what I understand, that Clarkton is the oldest settlement. Now, I'm sure there'll be open argument there. Of course, the area down around Hornersville is awful old. You know, it's and I don't know. I really don't.
Okay. What about? We have a couple of minutes. What about some of the other old deeds you have? You mentioned, I think, a bottling works or something.
Yes. Well, there was a Crescent bottling works at Malden. I think it was the forerunner of Lane Pepsi-Cola. In other words, I think Mr. Lane formed Crescent bottling works. There's a Malden Opera House where they...
a Malden Opera?
Malden Opera House.
Well, now, Kennett had an opera house. I know,
Yes.
flourishing in, what, 1900?
Probably. Mm-hmm.
What about, do you have any idea, you remember the date on the Malden
I haven't had a
Opera House?
no, I have this at the office, but it would be in the early 1900s.
Okay.
I'm sure of that. And,
So your number of deeds from people who really came in to buy land didn't begin until, when would you say? When was there a great influx of deeds? 1870s, 80s, 1900s? When did the majority of the people arrive? That's a hard question.
yes,
isn't
it is. I don't know. It would be the number of entries in a book, and usually a book we can go, today we'll go a full year.
Okay.
Now, if you had a year where it consumed 2 books, that would be the big, that would be the busy, and you had a lot of transactions. I imagine probably the 20s. I'd just guess the
Okay.
20s.
All right, your guest tonight has been Mr. T-Bone Hall, who's the Recorder of Deeds for Dunklin County. He has brought a lot of interesting things to our attention, one of which I would bet would amaze all of you, and that's you deeded children, the deeds of adoption that he has recorded. Thank you, Mr. Hall, for being our guest.
Thank you.
You have been watching Time for Talk. Time for Talk is a community betterment service designed to cooperate with our local community betterment program. Each evening, Monday through Friday at this time, Rosemary interviews local personalities and others who bring items of interest to this community. If you're